we're going to jump back to a safety data sheet. Now, what is a safety data sheet? Remember, we were talking about WHMIS earlier. So in WHMIS, we have a detailed safety data sheet which can be kept, let's say, in the library, or it's got to be somewhere central where you as an employee have a right to access it so you can know what you're dealing with. And the safety data sheet provides more details that we can't fit on the label. So that includes a product name, identification, a supplier, recommended use, restricted use, so stuff we should use it for, stuff we can't use it for. It's got the label details, and then it's got a list of all the chemicals that are in the product. So a product might have 2 or 3 or 4 different chemicals that can be hazardous, and so we want to list all the different chemicals and their concentrations, because we may have a solution of so we may have a mixture. And then below that we have section 4, which tells us what to do if there's exposure, so how to provide first aid. So that includes inhalation, skin. What do we do if someone breathes it in, if they get it on their skin, if they get it in their eye, or if they ingest it? And some of these may be nothing, depending on how dangerous it is. And then what are the most important symptoms and effects? So that can be acute effects, or which we see right away, or delayed effects. And then we have information for doctors. So what happens when we go see a doctor? What does a doctor do to treat the exposure? Is there anything special? And then section 5 tells us if this thing is flammable, how do we put out a fire? So what kind of fire extinguisher do we need, or is there some specific chemical we should use to try to put it out? And is there anything unsuitable for putting it out? And then what are the specific hazards from this product and special equipment that firefighters might need if there's a fire involving this chemical? So they should know before entering the building. And then what do we do if there's a accidental release? So how do we contain and clean up this chemical if it gets into the environment? And then what do we do? How do we handle this chemical safely? How do we store it? What are the conditions? And then we can look at some engineering controls and PPE controls. And then finally, or section 9 tells us the physical and chemical properties of the product. So what it looks like, what it smells like, its pH, its melting point, freezing point, boiling point, flash point, flammability, explosive limit, a vapor pressure, density, a solubility in water, temperature, and viscosity. And then we can also look at reactivity. So what other chemicals does it react with? What other chemicals to avoid? What does it decompose to? And then we look at toxicology. Toxicology. So does it get in through inhalation, skin contact, eye contact, or ingestion? And we call this, so acute toxicity, so we call this a lethal dose 50, or LD50. So LD50 Basically, we got a bunch of rats. This is measured in milligrams per kilo of body weight. So how much? So the LD50 is how many milligrams of this chemical do we need to kill a person based on their weight? So how many? Because it'll take more chemical to kill a bigger person than a smaller person. So we break it down by kilo, and we do that. They got a bunch of rats, and they give them chemical until they die, and then they see um, how much chemical it took to kill half the rats. That's where we get the 50% from. So on average, so if it's 10 milligrams per kilo, let's say, and you weigh 100 kilos, then it's going to take 10 times 100, so it's going to take 1,000 milligrams to kill you, or 1 gram on average. So it's a 50-50. So if we gave a gram to every person who weighed 100 kilos, half of them would die on average. So we got the oral one and we got the dermal one. So the dermal one could be higher or lower depending on the chemical. Some chemicals they break down in the stomach, but they absorb really well in the skin, and some chemicals don't. Some chemicals don't absorb at all in the skin, so you have to eat it. And then we can look at skin corrosion, eye damage, irritation, specific organs that can be damaged, and skin can be damaged, reproductive toxicity, fertility, lactation, DNA. And then finally, we got section 12, which is ecological. So this is all optional. So we may not, a company may not care about the environment, so they may not list any ecological information. But if they do, then they do. And then section 13 is optional, but that tells us how to properly dispose of the chemical. 14 is optional, but that tells us the proper way to transport the chemical. 15 is optional, but that gives us some regulatory info, and then 16 gives us latest revision. Any questions? Oh, one more thing. So when you're an employer and you have this safety data sheet, then you use this to plan out your safety program. So you make sure that everybody knows how to give first aid in the event of an exposure. So if you need very specific chemicals, for example, for cleanup, for firefighting, for storage, for first aid, then you make sure you buy those materials and you put them in place before the chemical shows up at your site. Any questions? Please leave a comment. Thank you.